Chapter 11. Bird in a Cage. Solomon had always dreamed of space travel, though he'd not expected it to be as traumatic as what he'd experienced going through the wormhole. The exit from Earth made him giddy as he gazed around at the stars and the close exposure to the moon. His giddiness turned to horror when the spider dragon appeared and ate his ship. Thankfully, the sink had prepared him for the apparition, though it didn't diminish the power of what he'd seen. His giddiness returned as he saw the planet of Gaia and honed in on his destination on the west coast. The mind link had shown him a large yellow city known as Ryenhart, where he was to find the yellow edge within, though it had not told him where. Orientated with the information in his mind, he'd landed on the rocky terrain on the city's outskirts. The hue of yellows across the landscape made Solomon feel slightly uneasy. The grass, rocks, vegetation, and wildlife were all varying shades of yellow. He'd made his way cautiously through the rocky terrain and caught sight of Ryenhart appearing in the distance. Its largest building appeared to be that of a church or cathedral, an enormous spire with stained-glass windows stretched up into the sky with a circular yellow ball resting atop. Below the spire, the buildings jutted outwards, appearing to take a large footprint of the city. The rocks that Kobe had passed made up the base framework of the city itself, its dull yellow bricks and stone giving a bright yet relaxed appearance. As Solomon moved closer, he saw above the bricks were wires and beams that stretched up and over the expanse of the city, as though it were inside a giant cage. As Solomon approached, he could hear the sound of wings beating overhead. Staring up at the sky, he beheld a flock of birds coming down towards the city's entrance. He did a double take as the birds appeared to be the size of men. He cowered as the wings whipped up the dust upon the ground and landed several feet away from him. To his surprise, Solomon saw that they were actually men, with wings protruding from their backs. Not only did they have wings, their bodies were covered in yellow feathers. Amazed, he followed them into the city, spellbound by the creatures. It was only a few paces inside did he realize the whole city was made up of birds. He saw some with beaks where their noses and mouths would have been. He saw some with heads of owls that could turn a full circle. Some had wings instead of arms. Some had bird feet instead of legs. Some flew, some walked, others waddled and waggled. Solomon felt as though he'd stumbled into some kind of bizarre dream as the bustling bird city stretched out before him. It was then that Solomon gazed to see buildings on the ground that men could go into, yet above was a glittering aviary that could only be reached with wings. The contrast between the ground and the sky was striking. Where the earth was gritty and dirty, the sky was clean, modern, and tantalizing. Above him were varying sized towers that had, what appeared to Solomon, bird houses sitting atop them, yet they were magnificent houses. Some had several pillars to support the enormous structures. Solomon watched as birds flew from building to building, some landing upon the ground to enter establishments, only to exit and fly up again. Yet nothing was tall as the church in the center. It towered above all the others, as the yellow ball atop the spire was illuminated by the sun, as though it was one itself. Returning his attention to the ground, Solomon noticed several strange expressions from the inhabitants around him. Each had at least one bird feature about them, and appeared to stare down at him through many yellow eyes. Feeling out of place, he decided to make for a tavern, and try and source information about the yellow edge. The streets of Ryenhart were winding and disorienting. It was hard to navigate easily on foot, something he sensed was not a problem for those who had wings. After several dead ends and circular trips, he found a building with a neon sign of Eat, Drink, Sleep buzzing loudly. Relieved, he pushed the yellow wooden doors inside and found himself in a dank foyer with a long yellow desk set inside. A pigeon-like woman popped up from underneath the table. He reminded Solomon of someone, but he could not place her. She stared at him quizzically and said in a shrill voice, "Do you have a reservation?" studying Solomon with dark yellow eyes above her sharp beak. "I don't, I'm sorry," said Solomon. "We have limited options for your—" she paused. "Kind. most of which would be out of your price range. Solomon remembered when instinct he'd been given credits, a currency he could use on Gaia. I can afford it, he said confidently. She narrowed her eyes as though unconvinced. I don't think you understand, she said, as though he were a child. You do know the Sunball tournament is starting tomorrow? Sunball, repeated Solomon. I think I've heard of it. He tried to find information about it in his mind link, but nothing was found. You're not a very good liar, are you? She said with a tilt of her head. If you actually knew about the tournament, you'd realize that accommodations have been booked out for months in advance, she said snidely. We have only the most premium rooms still available, but a no-beak like you couldn't afford it. No-beak? Puzzled Solomon. What tree did you fall out of? She questioned with a haughty laugh. You have no modifications to your body. Even your eyes haven't been changed to yellow. You are not welcome here, No-beak. Now leave, and let the paying bird customers come through. She raised a feathered arm and dismissed him. Solomon moved to the side and saw a family of birds approach the table. Solomon watched on angrily as the father, mother, and baby bird were treated with the utmost respect by the concierge. Solomon got eyes of suspicion from the family as they finished and moved through the lobby to where the rooms were. All of Solomon's life he'd experienced things like this, being treated differently because of how he looked. He had backed down so many times, preferring not to cause a scene, but this time was going to be different. Solomon walked back to the front of the concierge. She took no notice of him as she filed her long pointed fingernails. Solomon cleared his throat as her yellow eyes raised up at him. Yes, she said insincerely, wanting to find the door to leave. It's behind you. I want a premium room, said Solomon. The concierge threw her bird head back and cackled. You can't fool me, No-beak. You haven't got a single credit to your name. Just look at what you're wearing, she said, surveying him up and down. If you can't afford clothes that are in this century style, then you certainly can't afford the room. My mother said to never judge another person by their clothes or how they looked, said Solomon. Just because I'm different doesn't mean you get to treat me like I'm inferior. He kept his voice steady, his emotions close to boiling over. If you wanted to be treated better, No-beak, you'd look like us, snapped the concierge. You judge people based on their appearance. How do you know I'm not rich? Retorted Solomon angrily. Appearances are everything, she said emphatically. Do you think Ryenhart is naturally yellow? Do you think anywhere on Gaia it has its natural colouring? Of course it doesn't. We're not living in the past like you are, No-beak. We've changed our appearance and our environment and ourselves to respect the yellow edge. It's here. Of course it's here, she said, shaking her head at the question. If it wasn't here, we'd all be mindless monsters of the grey. We've changed our world and our bodies to match that of our edge, as have all the other places on Gaia. So when you say appearances aren't everything, you are completely wrong. Can I change my appearance? Asked Solomon carefully. Providing you have a reservation to a premium room and currency, a shamaton can turn even an ugly duckling into a beautiful swan, she said snidely. Solomon ignored her. Would this shamaton help me find the edge? Why would you ask that when it's atop the Order's cathedral? Solomon's heart leapt. He'd seen it on the way in. But it is only brought out during the Sunball tournament, in case of any troublesome individuals were to appear. She eyed him suspiciously. How do I get into the Sunball tournament? Solomon asked innocently. You really aren't from around here, are you, No-beak? The tournament has been sold out for years. It comes around once every 4 years and sells out instantly. His heart sank. Maybe I could find a scalper. When does it start? Tomorrow, of course. Didn't you see all the signs? You can read, can't you? She inquired. I can, thank you, replied Solomon. Now then, about the premium room. You said there was a shamaton inside. I'd like to book it. You cannot afford the premium room, and I'm afraid it would not be right to give it to someone of your kind. You said I could change. What if tomorrow I can change and be like every other bird here? He said. Wait, he caught himself. It's reversible, right? I can reverse the changes? Naturally, though I cannot fathom why you would. Natural human traits are so uncivilized, she said, staring down her beak. Then it's settled. I'll have that room, and tomorrow I'll be like everyone else, he said. If you can afford the room, she corrected, something I very much doubt. Try me, Solomon said with a grin. The concierge shook her head. I can't believe I'm actually going to do this. Place your face over the scanner, she said, indicating a small yellow box atop the desk with an LED light within. Solomon did so. The LED light connected with his mind link and verified his identity. A display of Solomon's details was projected, including his credit balance of a figure with a dozen trailing zeros. "Well, I'll be," she said, amazed. "Where did a no-big like you get so many credits?" "My Uncle Abe," said Solomon, grinning. "He takes care of me." "So I see," said the concierge in disbelief. "I will update you with access to your room. How long do you want the room for?" she asked politely. "How long does the tournament go for?" asked Solomon. "3 days," she replied. "Same as the festival," thought Solomon. "Yes, 3 days will be fine," he said aloud. "Your room is ready for you now. Remember our agreement. You will update your appearance?" she asked with a hint of a threat. "Of course," replied Solomon. "I will return in the morning. Which way do I go?" he asked. "Down the hall. I'd suggest using your internal navigation to locate your way," she said with a smirk. "Right," replied Solomon, forgetting his mind link. He accessed the information and made his way down the hall, the concierge watching him the entire time. Solomon didn't like this place very much. In fact, he'd prefer to not stay here at all. Yet he felt a sense of pride for standing his ground against the bird woman who'd wanted to refuse him entry. If she hadn't been so rude, he'd probably have found a different place altogether. Smiling to himself, he strolled down the lobby towards his room, ready for the change of appearance.